I pulled into my sister's driveway and just sat there with the engine running for a solid 2 minutes. The porch lights were on. I could hear music through the walls. Someone laughed. That high, sharp kind of laugh that carries through glass and siding and probably 3 zip codes. I turned off the ignition. My brother-in-law's name was on the guest list. His new girlfriend, the one nobody in the family had actually met yet, was apparently coming too. My sister thought it would be a good idea to introduce her at Mom's birthday dinner. My sister thinks a lot of things are good ideas. I hadn't told anyone what I did for a living. Not really. Not the full version. I'd been promoted 8 months ago. Federal Circuit Court judge, appointed at 34, the youngest in my district in 40 years. The confirmation hearings had been brutal and quiet, and I'd kept my head down through all of it. My family knew I was still in law, which in their minds meant I was probably reviewing contracts somewhere and billing by the hour. When I missed Thanksgiving, my mom assumed it was because things weren't going well at work. When I missed my nephew's birthday party, my sister assumed the same thing. I let them assume. It wasn't strategy, it was survival. The confirmation process had been consuming in a way I still couldn't explain to people who hadn't lived it. The background checks, the Senate hearings, the waiting. I'd moved into temporary housing, changed my number twice for security reasons, and essentially disappeared from my personal life for the better part of a year. By the time I surfaced, the story had already been written without me. I was the one who'd pulled away. The one who thought she was too good for family dinners. The one who'd always been a little much. They didn't know. And I'd been too tired to correct it. I grabbed the flowers off the passenger seat, Gerber daisies, my mom's favorite, and went inside. The house smelled like garlic bread and my mom's perfume and something I couldn't quite place. My sister had redecorated since I'd last been there. New throw pillows, a gallery wall with photos I wasn't in. Mom found me first. She pulled me into a hug that lasted exactly long enough to feel genuine, then held me at arm's length and said, "You look exhausted." "I'm great, Mom." "Happy birthday." "You're thin." "I'm not." She cupped my face in both hands the way she'd done since I was 7 and looked at me like she was reading something. Then she smiled, the real one, not the company one, and kissed my cheek. "Glad you came," she said. That was my mom. She led with worry, but she meant love. I'd learned to translate. My brother-in-law, Curtis, was in the living room, holding a drink he probably didn't need. He'd been married to my sister for 6 years. I'd always been politely tolerant of him, which I think he sensed, which I think he resented. He had the kind of confidence that came from never being seriously challenged at anything. He was talking to his girlfriend. She was younger than I expected, maybe late 20s, and she was dressed like she'd come from a work function, sharp blazer, good shoes. She smiled when she saw me coming and extended her hand. "You must be the sister," she said. "I'm Noelle." "I'm Valerie," I said. "Nice to meet you." "Val's the lawyer," Curtis said, already talking over the introduction. He said it the way you'd say Val's the one who never got married, or Val's the one who always had opinions, like it was a personality defect dressed up as a credential. "Oh, what kind of law?" Noelle asked. Before I could answer, Curtis said, "Family law, right? Divorces and stuff?" "Not exactly," I said. Right. He wasn't listening. He'd already moved on. "Noelle's actually going through something legal right now, aren't you, babe?" She nodded, a small flicker of something uncomfortable crossing her face. "Civil matter," she said. "Nothing serious." "Val could probably give you some free advice," Curtis said, laughing like he'd made a joke. I smiled the way I'd learned to smile in federal court. Steady. Patient. Giving nothing away. We sat down to dinner 20 minutes later. My mom had made her pot roast, the one that took all day and required a specific Dutch oven she'd had since 1987. My nephew, 6 years old, deeply committed to his dinosaur phase, sat next to me and spent the first 10 minutes explaining the difference between a Brachiosaurus and a Camarasaurus while I ate my salad and thought, God, I love this kid. The adults were less soothing. Curtis had apparently been doing well. He worked in commercial real estate, which meant he was very comfortable talking about square footage and cap rates and the general incompetence of everyone in his industry except himself. "Biggest deal of my career," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Mixed-use development. Downtown corridor, we're talking 30 million easy." "Wow," my mom said, because my mom is kind. "It's not finalized yet," my sister added quickly, and I noticed the way she said it. Not pride, exactly. And when I noticed the way she said it, not pride, exactly. More like managing expectations. "It will be," Curtis said. "There are a few regulatory hurdles, zoning variants, environmental review, that kind of stuff. What kind of environmental review? I asked. He looked at me. The standard kind. Why? Just curious. It's fine. Our attorneys are handling it. I nodded and went back to my pot roast. Here's the thing. He'd said enough. $30 million mixed-use development, downtown corridor, zoning variance, environmental review. I knew that project. I knew it because my clerk had handed me the case file 11 days ago. A developer, mid-sized firm, aggressive acquisition strategy, had filed for a variance that the city's environmental office had flagged for review. The case had been kicked up to my court because one of the parties was challenging the jurisdiction of the local zoning board. It was sitting on my desk, sealed, active, mine. And Curtis was the developer's representative. His firm's name was on the filing. I kept my face completely still. My sister passed me the bread. Curtis got louder as dinner went on. He always did. By the time dessert came out, my mom's lemon pound cake with the powdered sugar on top, he'd moved from real estate to his general worldview, which could be summarized as, people who succeed deserve it, people who don't should stop complaining. The regulatory system in this state is a joke, he said, fork in hand. You have bureaucrats who've never built anything in their lives signing off on projects that could employ hundreds of people. It's insane. There are usually reasons for the regulations, I said. Oh, sure. Theoretically. He pointed his fork vaguely at me. But in practice, it's gatekeeping, people protecting their little fiefdoms. Some of those fiefdoms are environmental protections, I said. He smiled, the kind of smile that means he wasn't actually listening to me. Val, I love that you care about that stuff. I do, but the real world doesn't run on idealism. My sister was looking at her plate. My mom changed the subject. Noelle hadn't said anything in a while. She was watching Curtis, the way you watch someone when you're still deciding what you think of them. I filed that away. After dinner, while my nephew showed me his dinosaur encyclopedia and Curtis held court with my brother in the kitchen, Noelle drifted over to where I was sitting on the living room floor with 6-year-old commentary on sauropod neck length. Can I ask you something? She said, sitting on the couch nearby. Sure, she lowered her voice. Is Curtis's project, the one he mentioned, is it actually in trouble? I looked at her carefully. Why are you asking me? He told me it was done, that the regulatory stuff was just a formality. She paused. But when I asked his attorney the same question, she gave me a different answer. I can't comment on any specific legal matter, I said. I genuinely can't. But I'd say that if someone's attorney is giving you a different answer than your partner is, that's information worth taking seriously. She looked at me for a moment. Then she nodded. Okay, she said. Thanks. The encyclopedia got pushed back in my face. Apparently the Camarasaurus had a blunt snout and I needed to understand why that mattered. I left early. My mom walked me out to the driveway and held both my hands while the cold air settled around us. Are you really okay? She asked. I'm good, Mom. I promise. You're not just saying that? I'm not just saying that. She searched my face. You've been so far away this year. I know you've been busy. I don't want you to think that busy is the same as invisible. I squeezed her hands. I know. I'm sorry. There's something I should have told you sooner. About the job. About everything. Tell me now. Not tonight. It's your birthday. But soon, I promise. She kissed me on the cheek again. Drive safe, she said, which was her way of saying she loved me and she was scared of losing me and she wished she knew what was happening in my life. I drove home with the heat on and my hands tight on the wheel. The case file was on my desk when I got there. I turned on the lamp, sat down, and read through everything again. Curtis's firm, Hartwell Development Partners, had applied for a zoning variance on a 14-acre site in the downtown corridor. The environmental review had been flagged because the site had prior industrial use and there were questions about soil contamination. The city's planning office had recommended additional testing. Hartwell had argued the testing requirement was procedural overreach. The local zoning board had sided with the planning office. Hartwell had appealed. That appeal was now before me. His attorneys had submitted aggressive briefs. They were good. They were also, I noticed, leaning heavily on case precedent that had been quietly modified by a ruling in the Ninth Circuit 14 months ago. A ruling that most smaller firms hadn't fully integrated into their arguments yet. The problem wasn't the legal strategy. The problem was one paragraph buried on page 37 of Hartwell's environmental assessment. A single paragraph about prior soil testing dated 4 years ago, conducted by a third-party firm that had since dissolved. The results cited were clean. But the methodology described in the paragraph didn't match standard protocol for that type of site. Someone had either made an error or someone had known what they were doing. I wasn't going to call it, not yet, but I made a note for my clerk. 2 weeks later, my sister called. "I need to talk to you about something," she said. "Okay." "It's about Curtis." She paused. "His project, the big one, something happened." "What happened?" "His attorneys got a motion from the court, a formal request for additional documentation. His whole team is in crisis mode. He's not handling it well." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, "and I meant it in the measured way you mean it when you're a federal judge and the person you're sorry for has submitted questionable documentation to your court." "He thinks someone tipped off the opposing counsel," she said. "He keeps saying someone must have gone through his files. He's talking about corruption." "Corruption," I said. "He's furious. He had a meeting with his attorneys yesterday and he came home and he punched the wall in the garage." Silence. "He punched the wall in the garage." Silence. "He punched the wall," I said. "He does that sometimes when he's stressed. It's not directed at me." "Are you sure?" Another silence. Longer. "I don't know," she said. I closed my eyes. "Okay," I said. "I'm going to ask you something and I need you to be honest with me. Just for right now, just between us. Are you okay?" "I think so. Is there anything you need?" "No, I needed to tell someone." "Then I'm glad you called." The case moved through its next phase. I won't detail the specifics because I can't and because that's not the story. The story is what happened in the gap between the courthouse and the rest of my life. Hartwell's additional documentation came in. My clerk reviewed it with 2 forensic accountants the court retained. The soil testing issue turned out to be exactly what the paragraph had suggested it might be. The prior testing report had been selectively summarized. The actual raw data, which Hartwell was now compelled to produce, showed elevated contamination markers that had not been disclosed in the original variance application. This was no longer a zoning dispute. The city's environmental office got involved. The state attorney general's office was notified. The case expanded in ways that had nothing to do with me specifically and everything to do with the documents that had been submitted to my court under oath. Curtis's firm hired a crisis communications team. I knew this because it was in the business section of the local paper, which I read over coffee on a Thursday morning like a normal person. My sister called again 3 days later. "He told me," she said, "about the contamination, about the documents." "What did he say?" "He said it was a mistake by the firm's environmental consultant. He said he didn't know." She paused. "Do you believe that?" "I can't speak to what Curtis knew or didn't know," I said. "That's genuinely not something I can comment on." "Can you tell me," she said slowly, "whether the judge in this case is someone who's going to be fair?" And I had to make a choice then. "The judge in that case," I said, "is someone who follows the law, who takes the records seriously, who isn't going to let anything get swept under a rug. I can tell you that much." Silence. "Val," she said, "is it you?" I didn't say anything. "Oh my God," she said. "Oh my God," and she said, "Oh my God, it's you." "I can't confirm." "How long?" 8 months. 8 months. 8 months you've been a federal judge and you didn't tell us? It's complicated." "It's not complicated. Val, Mom thinks you've been struggling. She thinks you're alone and underwater and—" She stopped. "Does she know?" "No. You have to tell her." "I know. Tonight." "I was going to tonight," she said. "I mean it. You call her tonight, Shial?" "I will." I called my mom that evening. I sat on my couch with a cup of tea I'd forgotten to drink, and I called her and I told her everything. The appointment, the confirmation, the hearings, the security protocols that had made it impossible to talk about, the year of near silence that she'd interpreted as distance and I'd experienced as an endurance test. She was quiet for a long time after. Then she said, "I told everyone you were in law. You were right. I told your aunt that you were probably reviewing contracts. Well, I'm reviewing cases." She laughed. It was the kind of laugh that meant she was also crying. "My daughter," she said. "My daughter, the federal judge." "Mom, no, let me have this." She laughed again. "I'm going to tell your aunt. I'm calling her right now after this. It's 9:30. She'll want to know." My sister filed for divorce 6 weeks later. I didn't help her with it. Obviously, I couldn't be her attorney and I had other things to manage. But I drove to her house on a Saturday morning with coffee and sat with her at the kitchen table while she cried and then stopped crying and then started crying again. "I should have seen it earlier," she said. "Sometimes you don't see what you're not looking for." "Did you know when you came to dinner?" "I knew his case was in my court," I said. "I didn't know anything about the rest." She looked at me. "He said afterward After everything came out, he said the reason the documentation issue got flagged was because someone on the court was out to get him. He said it was personal. Was it? No, I said. I read a paragraph that didn't add up. That's all. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. Outside, her son was in the backyard poking something in the grass with a stick, deeply absorbed in whatever 6-year-old investigation he'd launched. He called you Val the lawyer, she said. At dinner? He did, like it was a consolation prize. I noticed. She smiled. First real one I'd seen from her in a while. What do you say now when people ask what you do? I say I'm in law. She laughed, actually laughed, and I thought, there she is. There's my sister. My mom's birthday came around again. We did it at my house this time. Bigger table, better wine. My nephew informing everyone present that ankylosaurs had club tails made of fused bone and could break the legs of a T-Rex. My mom sat at the head of the table in the chair I'd bought specifically for this occasion and glowed like someone who'd been given exactly what she wanted, which I think was all of us together in one place. My aunt, who had indeed been called at 9:30 that night, introduced me to her new book club friend by saying, "This is my niece, the federal judge." She did it 4 separate times over the course of the evening. I found that I didn't mind. After dinner, when the dishes were done and my nephew was asleep on the couch with a dinosaur book on his face, my mom found me on the back porch. "Happy?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, and I meant it. She leaned against the railing next to me and looked up at the sky. "I want to say something, and I don't want you to get defensive." "Okay. I understand why you didn't tell us. I do. But I want you to know, whatever is hard in your life, whatever is big, I don't need the polished version. I just need you to let me in." She paused. You know, I did know. I'd known it for a long time and spent a lot of years treating it like a nice idea rather than something I actually practiced. "I know," I said. "I'm working on it." She bumped my shoulder with hers. "That's all I'm asking." We stood there for a while in the cold, watching the neighbor's porch light flicker on and off the way it always had. It was quiet in the way that family dinners only occasionally get to be, the good kind of quiet, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. Curtis's firm had entered into a consent decree with the state environmental agency. His name was in the paper one more time after that, and then it wasn't. I didn't follow it beyond what crossed my desk, which was nothing, because the case had resolved below the level of my court once the criminal referral had been sorted by other hands. I thought about him exactly once after that, standing in the grocery store in front of a wall of sparkling water, and the thought lasted about 4 seconds. Then I grabbed the lime-flavored one and went home. I've thought a lot about what actually happened in all of this. Not the legal part, that's paperwork and procedure and other people's problems to sort out now. I mean the part underneath it. The part that started long before Curtis ever opened his mouth at that dinner table. Here's what I keep coming back to. I made it easy for them. I went quiet for a year and I let the silence mean whatever they needed it to mean. My mom worried. My sister filled in the blanks. And Curtis just picked up the story that was already floating around and ran with it because it served him. That's what people like him do. They don't create the narrative. They just find the one that's already there and climb on top of it. I used to think that staying quiet was a form of discipline, that not needing anyone to know made me serious, made me focused, made me the kind of person who didn't require validation to function, and maybe some of that was true. But I also think, and this took me a while to admit, that part of it was just easier. Telling people the truth about your life means letting them into it. It means being seen when things are hard, not just when things are good. I hadn't figured out how to do that yet. Curtis walked into that dinner and talked about my court's case like it was a done deal. He dismissed the regulatory process as an inconvenience, dismissed the people enforcing it as bureaucrats with nothing better to do. He built his entire professional identity on the idea that the rules applied to other people, smaller people, less confident people, people who didn't know how to work a room. And he'd gotten far enough with that approach that he'd stopped questioning it. That's the thing about cutting corners. It works until it doesn't, and when it stops working, it doesn't just stop, it unravels. Because every corner you cut is a structural piece you removed, and eventually the weight of the whole thing has nothing left to rest on. I didn't set out to catch him. I read a paragraph that didn't add up, the way I've read thousands of paragraphs that didn't add up. And I did what I always do. I noted it and kept going. The consequences that followed came from his own choices, documented in his own filings, submitted under his own signature. I was just the person holding the record. What I've learned. really learned, not the version I used to tell myself, is that integrity isn't dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It's just the accumulated weight of small decisions made correctly over a long period of time. It's reading page 37 when you're tired. It's calling your mom on a Tuesday when there's nothing to report. It's letting the people who love you know where you actually are, not just the polished version of where you want them to think you are. My sister is doing better. She took a hard look at her life and made a hard call, and she's still standing. That's not nothing. That's actually everything. And my nephew still corrects me on sauropod taxonomy every single time I see him, which I have decided is the greatest constant in my life.